All right, welcome. So today we are diving into something, well, truly mind-bending. I want you to think about this. What if the deepest truths of modern physics weren't figured out in giant particle colliders, but were actually predicted thousands of years ago using nothing more than pure logic?
I mean, really let that sink in for a second. What if our most advanced theories are just rediscoveries? It sounds impossible, right? How could that even happen? Well, maybe it's because pure logic, when you get really rigorous with it, is a tool for finding the deep consistencies of reality. You know, the very same rules that physics tries to describe with math and experiments. And the parallels, they are absolutely stunning.
And this brings us to the core idea of this whole explainer. I want you to think of ancient philosophers not as old men in togas, but as the original hackers. Seriously, they didn't have computers or labs, right? Their tool was logic, and what they were doing was trying to reverse engineer the operating system of the universe. In doing that, they found the first cracks, the first logical bugs in how we all intuitively see the world.
So, let's start with the absolute fundamentals, the stage where everything happens. You know, space and time. It turns out our basic ideas about this stage are deeply flawed. And the first hints of this came from Plato, way back around 380 BCE. This is Plato's famous allegory of the cave. He asks us to imagine a group of people who have been imprisoned since they were born. They're chained up, facing a blank wall, and they can't even turn their heads. This is the only world they have ever known.
So behind them, there's a fire. And between the fire and these prisoners, you've got puppeteers holding up all kinds of objects, which cast shadows onto the wall. The prisoners, all they see are these flickering, two-dimensional shapes. They hear echoes, and they believe that is everything. That is their entire reality.
And that's a really crucial question. For them, reality isn't the 3D objects behind them. It is the 2D shadows on the wall. They would probably name them, study how they behave, become experts in this world of shadows. They would have absolutely no idea that their reality is just a lower dimensional projection of something way richer and more real.
And here's where it gets crazy. This thought experiment, it perfectly describes a cutting-edge theory in physics today called the holographic principle. This idea suggests that our three-dimensional world could itself be a projection of information that's encoded on some distant, two-dimensional surface, kind of like a cosmic hologram. Plato, just by thinking, laid out the core idea of holography 2,400 years before its time. It's just staggering.
Okay, now let's jump to another hacker, Zeno of Elea. He came up with this paradox about a race between the warrior Achilles and a tortoise. So the tortoise gets a head start. To catch up, Achilles has to first get to where the tortoise started. But by the time he gets there, the tortoise has already moved on a little bit. So Achilles has to cover that new, smaller distance. But again, the tortoise has inched forward. Logically, this just goes on forever. Achilles is always closing the gap, but he never actually seems to reach the tortoise. So how does he ever pass it?
See, Zeno's paradox isn't just a brain teaser. It reveals a huge flaw in how we think about the world. The paradox only works if you assume space and time can be divided up forever into infinite little pieces. But what if they can't? Modern physics actually suggests that reality isn't smooth and continuous, that at the tiniest level, we're talking the Planck scale, space itself might be made of these discrete, indivisible units, basically pixels on a screen. And if that's true, there isn't an infinite number of gaps to cross. Zeno had found a logical bug in our idea of continuous spacetime 2,500 years before we had the tools to even test it.
Okay, so the stage of reality, space and time, is super weird. But what about the user? You know, the person observing it all. The next group of hackers, well, they turn their focus inward, to the relationship between us and the world we see.
The ancient skeptics had this really simple but profound little argument. Imagine some honey. To a healthy person, it tastes sweet, but to someone who's sick, maybe with a fever, it tastes bitter. So, what is the honey in itself? Is it sweet? Is it bitter? The skeptics argued, we can't really say. We can only talk about how it appears to us in a specific context.
And this maps perfectly onto a core idea in quantum mechanics called quantum contextualism. It basically says that a particle, like an electron, literally has no definite position until you measure it. The property isn't some fixed thing just waiting to be discovered. It's co-created in the very act of looking. The skeptics totally nailed the fundamental idea. Properties are relational.
Okay, fast forward hundreds of years. René Descartes takes this observer-centric idea and pushes it to its absolute limit. He decided he was going to doubt everything he possibly could, his senses, his memories, even the outside world itself. He imagined, what if I'm in a dream, or what if some evil demon is tricking me?
But he realized there was one thing he just couldn't doubt, the act of doubting itself, the fact that his own conscious experience was happening. And his conclusion became one of the most famous phrases in history, I think, therefore I am. And this makes the observer the one undeniable starting point. You don't start with a world and then add an observer. No, you have to start with the observer's experience and build the world out from there, a radical idea that's now a cornerstone of how we think about physics.
So, we've got a strange stage and a central observer. But what holds it all together? What is the actual source code of reality made of? Well, this brings us to a big debate between two of the greatest Greek thinkers.
On one side, you had Democritus, who argued that everything was made of tiny, hard particles, atoms. The stuff was the most basic thing. But Aristotle, he disagreed. He said that what makes a table isn't the wood, but its form, its structure, its pattern, the information that arranges that wood into a table. I mean, you can make a table from metal or plastic. As long as the pattern holds, it's still a table. So for Aristotle, that meant information. The pattern was more fundamental than the physical stuff itself.
And this final piece, this idea that reality is fundamentally made of information, is the key that unlocks everything else. Suddenly, all these different philosophical hacks, they all start to snap together into a single, coherent picture.
Just look at this map for a second. It's incredible. You've got Plato's cave echoing the holographic principle. You have Zeno's paradox pointing directly to a pixelated Planck-scale universe. The skeptic's honey argument totally prefiguring quantum measurement. Descartes putting the observer first, just like modern physics is now forced to do. Even Kant's idea that our minds structure reality connects to modern theories of emergent geometry. And underneath it all, Aristotle's big insight, that information, the form, trumps matter.
So, this brings us to the final and maybe the most mind-bending implication of an information-based reality. If the universe is all about processing information, what does that say about us, the information processors who live inside of it?
Well, this concept was beautifully explored by a guy named Douglas Hofstadter. He talked about something called a strange loop. It's a system that refers back to itself in this paradoxical way. Think of that famous M.C. Escher drawing of two hands, where each hand is drawing the other one into existence. Neither hand is more fundamental, right? The loop itself is the reality.
Hofstadter argued that consciousness itself is a strange loop. It's a pattern in our brain that is perceiving itself perceiving. The I isn't a thing, it's a self-referential process. So what if this applies to the whole universe? A physical system evolves observers who in turn figure out the laws of that physical system, and eventually become capable of simulating it themselves. Reality creates observers who then create reality.
And that's really the ultimate thought here. If these ancient hackers and modern physicists are both right, we might be living inside a grand computation. And our entire quest for knowledge, our philosophy, our science, is just the process of that computation becoming self-aware. We are the universe figuring itself out. What a thought to end on.